Okay, we're going to get going here. This is the workshop on preserving reproductive freedom. So if you mean to be in safe schools, you have about 20 seconds to exit. So my name is Kathy Day, and I'm the Public Policy Director for the ACLU of Montana, and I am delighted to see this full room. We are so excited to have you here. My colleague, Betsy Griffin, and I hopefully will be engaging with you this afternoon in a conversation about reproductive freedom in Montana. And we want to set the stage for you. Those of us who are at the point in our lives where we're beginning to admit that we might be middle-aged, present company speaking, have spent a lot of years assuming, as we looked at the 35th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, that my reproductive rights, my reproductive choices and freedoms were intact. And yet, as you heard Steve Shapiro speak a few moments ago, our civil liberties continue to be under assault. And in the state of Montana, our reproductive rights and reproductive freedoms, which are civil liberties which affect everyone, have seen an onslaught of attacks and initiatives to erode what some of us may have grown up thinking were safe. Freedoms that we thought and choices that we thought that we could make that were safe and that are now continuing to be questionable. And so we find ourselves today fighting CI 100, and it's a proposed constitutional amendment to amend our Constitution. But as we begin to talk about that, and we'll have our constitutional scholar here to tell you the implications, and then I will talk to you about what we're doing on what's happening in Montana and how you can become engaged. We wanted to set the stage for you because you're here because you believe in civil liberties, and we felt the best way to do that was to share with you how reproductive freedom, reproductive rights are really civil liberties issues for all of us. And we have a short YouTube that was done on behalf of the National ACLU on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade that we're going to play for you. You can see it pretty good in a minute. And I think the sound will work okay when I put the mic up next to it. As I'm speaking too, I just want to make sure you all have, there's several flyers. We'll keep passing them around. Also, I'm going to ask that if any of you want to engage in the battle as we talk, there's a petition that we'll be passing around. If you'd like to help us in the on-the-ground effort, and if you want to sign this, it will be used only for this effort, and your names won't be shared with anyone else. It'll be used only. As well as when we get into our presentation, there are handouts of the PowerPoint so you can take notes. So with that, I think we'll begin with the recognition of the anniversary of Roe versus Wade.
This is the 35th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade is the United States Supreme Court decision that for the first time ever recognized that the Constitution protects our right to decide to end a pregnancy as well as our right to continue a pregnancy.
Roe versus Wade is the case that really solidified the individual constitutional right to autonomy, the right that says that there are some aspects of a person's life that the government really can't interfere with.
Roe versus Wade and the protection of reproductive rights is important as a sign that reproductive rights is a civil liberty, but it's an incredibly important decision for all of our civil liberties. The decision rests on the right of privacy. It's important to women's equality, and it's important to notions of fairness that are important for women, they're important for families, they're important for our freedom to participate in society regardless of where we were born, regardless of the color of our skin, regardless of our sexual identity.
Roe takes a concept of individual liberty that was very conventional and moves it past the conventional into something that very much focuses on individuals and empowers individuals. The Constitution had already said basically that you have the right to think what you want, to have your own views of the world. What Roe did is to say, and you have the right to live your life that way without government interference. You have the right to decide what you think is good, what makes for a good life, and to live it.
Well, the Women's Rights Project deals with all forms of discrimination against women and equality for women. And the reproductive freedom enshrined in Roe versus Wade, of course, is central to all of women's equality. So all of the work that we do builds on the ability of women to control their reproductive lives and be full participants in society.
There's another way to look at Roe. Roe was decided on privacy grounds, and when I think about it that way, it's harder to say, well, what's the direct connection between that and immigrants' rights? But more fundamentally, Roe was a case about equal protection and about women, people based on their gender, still having the rights to full participation, and they couldn't have that kind of we can't have that right to full participation without being able to control our reproductive rights. So if you look at it as an equal protection case, then you can see the connections much more with immigrants, because that's one of the basic things that we're fighting for in terms of immigrants, to recognize that your citizenship status isn't a basis for denying you equal protection of the laws.
Roe versus Wade has an impact on the work of the racial justice program, sometimes in ways that wouldn't be expected. Much of the work of the racial justice program deals with opportunity, an opportunity to get an adequate education, an opportunity to enjoy full involvement in civic life. And in many ways, the decision in Roe had an impact on the ability, particularly of women of color, to get that kind of full participation.
When talking about human rights, it's really about certain bedrock fundamental principles like equality, like the right to dignity, and enjoyment of rights by all people, including women. And that is one of the reasons when we talk about full participation in society, in fulfillment of the person, and realizing those rights. This is in the context of Roe is what is this all about? Is really making women realize their fundamental human rights under the U.S. Constitution, but more broadly under the international framework which has developed over the last 60 years.
Roe against Wade is essential to maintaining life in the United States as we have come to know it. People's memories are very short. Life in the United States was really different 40 years ago. There's the obvious things. There's backstreet abortions, but there's no contraceptions. There's telling people they can't get remarried. There's telling people that they can't raise their children certain ways. You take away Roe against Wade, and we empower the states to go back to a pre-1960 United States. And if you don't think that's a threat, just look around the state legislatures in a lot of this country. It's a real possibility and a real threat.
If Roe versus Wade were overturned, that would not only be a severe restriction on women's reproductive rights, but would in fact curtail women's participation in society much more broadly. It's important that women be able to make these kinds of decisions so that they can make other decisions in their lives, such as employment, education. If women are once again returned to a time when their lives are controlled by their childbearing, that means that their opportunities for the rest of their lives will be severely curtailed as well.
Women for ages have been treated as second class, and Roe is essential in order for them not to be treated as second class. And what we're fighting for with immigrants is for them not to be treated as second class either.
I think there are two significant dangers, and we're going to see them play out in 2008 in the legislatures. One is the effort to truly ban abortion and to prompt the courts to reverse Roe versus Wade. That's obviously a huge threat because it's a ban, but I think in the face of that ban, people will be energized and people will act to protect the right. So I think the more pernicious threat is the threat that we have been seeing and that has been quite vibrant for over a decade, which is to chip away, to pass laws to restrict access first and foremost for poor women, for teens, for other groups who are less powerful in society. And the question is, will people notice and will people care before we've lost too much of the right?
While we have to be concerned about losing Roe against Wade and the changes that it's made, we also have to recognize that the promise of Roe has hardly been realized. We're not in a We're not in a society yet where people's intimate lives really are off limits to the government. For example, in most states in this country, we still have sex education that teaches kids that the only kind of sex that's acceptable is sex after you're married, that you should be abstinent until you're married, and then says to kids, and by the way, if you're in a same-sex relationship, you can't get married. So the effective message is you can't have an intimate life, you can't have a sexual life at all. It's a terrible message of not only of kind of a bleak vision of the future, but a terrible message about the value of certain people's lives and what they mean. I don't think we'll have fulfilled the promise of Roe until we get the state out of the business of telling people what are acceptable human relationships and what aren't.
Going further, in terms of extending the rights of Roe versus Wade, I think it's important that the rights that Roe guarantees be made available to all people. There's always a distinction between the rights that are enjoyed by one group or the other. We know that people of color tend to have less access to medical care and therefore frequently have less of an opportunity to make choices that that majority citizens can. I think it's important that the choice that Roe guarantees be made available to all people, that there be more education, that there be more doctors and medical facilities available in places that are currently underserved.
We've come a long way, certainly since the 1970s, but women are still not fully equal in government, in employment, in educational facilities. We've increased a lot, but we still have a ways to go.
Roe versus Wade really comes down to one basic question. What would it be like if you didn't have the freedom to make decisions about fundamental aspects of your life? That's what's at stake.
And that's what we're facing right now with CI 100 in Montana. Last October, at the end of October, Representative Rick Jor, who will no longer be serving in the legislature, he's termed out, submitted a proposed constitutional amendment to amend Section 1 of Article 2 of the Constitution, to do what he says is basically simply to ban abortion. And that's the ultimate outcome of this. Yet, as you'll see, as we go through the legal challenges and the implications of this far-reaching initiative, it is much more than that. We provided for you, for those of you who don't carry around a copy of the Constitution with you, what that looks like, because the words are really important. And Betsy's going to go through the scholarly look at it. But what you'll see is they have changed the name of the section, first of all, from inalienable rights to right to life and inalienable rights. And then to add the wording that every person has a paramount and fundamental right to life. Then the next change, which is a very different way of looking at things, it comes from basically a religious philosophical roots, is change the word born to created, that all persons are created free from and have certain inalienable rights from the moment of conception. Then the article pretty much stays the same, but there is inserted then a section that says that this, used in this article, a person includes all human beings at all stages of human development, including the state of fertilization, regardless of age, health, level of functioning, or condition of dependency. And then it goes on to say that subsections 1 and 3 and 2 must be implemented by legislation. So that the definitions, and Betsy will talk about this in a minute, will be implemented in legislative sessions by our legislature. What that will look like on the ballot is this. This will be the statement of purpose on the ballot. And you've got that in front of you, I'll just let you read that. But it's that all persons have a paramount and fundamental right to life, and from the moment of conception. And this is what will be on the ballot. And then the ballot statements that people will be voting on will be either for amending the Montana Constitution to provide a right to life from conception that includes all stages of life regardless of age or health, or against the same statement. With that, I'll turn it over to Betsy, who will talk to you about what that means legally for us and constitutionally.
Thanks, Kathy. Can I just kind of signal you when I want a new slide? Yep. I have never used PowerPoint. No, this is a new thing for me. And someone was saying earlier that you know, PowerPoint kind of lulls a person into a sense of passive participation, and I really hope that's not the case. I hope that if you have questions as I talk, I don't want this to be a lecture. I want it to be a cooperative effort here to look at what this very serious thing is. And it's just marvelous, wow, to see all these people here. I hadn't turned around. See all these people here who are very concerned about this. This is an immense impact that this constitutional amendment might have. What are we talking about first? Well, we're talking about a constitutional amendment. What does that mean? Well, that is what you have to go out and talk to people about first. Constitution, what does it do? Well, it defines who we are in relation to our government, right? It's our compact that we have with our government and what it can do. But more importantly, it defines who we are. This amendment goes to the heart of defining who we are and our relationship with the government. So the first thing that it does is it's extremely broad. Okay? It's an extreme, we don't even know the full impact of this amendment. Because it says initially, it says the right to life is paramount. And that it amends more than one section, but the first thing it says, and you saw in the previous slide, it says the right to life is paramount. Well, what does that mean? Say the intention of this is just to ban abortions. Say that, but what does it mean when it says the right to life is paramount? How does that affect, for example, many other issues that you can possibly think about in comparing the right to other interests? Say, for example, and this may be actually a good thing, yeah, what about capital punishment?
Yeah, that's what I was going to
say. Exactly. What about capital punishment? And maybe this is a good part of this particular amendment. It says the right to life is paramount. Does that mean that we would no longer have the death penalty in Montana? I think it makes a really good argument for that. But certainly, again, that's an unintended consequence of what can happen when you reach into our organic document and you start defining fundamental rights and playing with these fundamental rights without really understanding the full impact of these fundamental rights. So they believe by the proponents believe by saying the right to life is paramount, they're only thinking in terms of the phraseology that they use in the political context of right to life. They're not thinking of how it will affect us organically as a people and how we define ourselves in all our other constitutional contexts. And it's really important that as you talk about this to your friends and family or people ask you about this particular issue, is to say that. The first thing is, wow, this is such a broad amendment, we don't even know its full impact. The second thing that it does, get this, it redefines person. It redefines what a person is and who a person is for all of Article 2, and that's the way the language reads, for Article 2 of the Montana Constitution. Well, what is Article 2 of the Montana Constitution? What is that? That's our Declaration of Rights. There are 34 discrete individual rights listed in Article 2. Well, what are they? Guess what? It's the individual right to dignity. It's the individual right to equal protection, to free speech and expression, to be free from searches and seizures, to bear arms, to have access to courts, to due process. When you define a person from the moment of fertilization, you are kicking in every one of those rights, right? Sure, why not? I mean, that's what it says. Would not to be flippant, but would a pregnant woman be able to vote twice? I just, it's very, you have to ask these questions to yourself as if we're going to redefine person, for all of Article 2, what is the full impact of that? And it's not like we're not going to know it right off the bat. We're not going to know it because, and they'd say, well, we're going to give the legislature must implement this. Oh, that gives me great confidence. No disrespect to the people, the legislators here. But I'm sure you feel the same way, right? Right? This must be implemented by legislation. Well, number one you have to look at, is that really constitutional in itself? Can you have the legislature defining the scope of individual rights? Now, the legislature does implement lots of different constitutional rights. These are non-self, and they do that kind of thing all the time. But rarely are they in Article 2. Okay? Rarely are they, one of the only rights that's limited by legislative authority in Article 2 is the right to know. We have the right to know what goes on in government as provided by law. But the other rights in Article 2, this right to privacy, the individual right to privacy, it doesn't use the word person, so actually I didn't mention it earlier, but it certainly is one of our paramount and most unique and marvelous features in our Montana Constitution, the individual right of privacy in Montana. What would happen then if the legislature can define the scope and extent of the right of privacy? Individual rights in Article 2 generally operate as what? As a check on legislative authority. They are the check that the judges, the courts use in interpreting the Constitution to say, you legislature, you executive branch, you even judiciary have gone beyond your authority because we have certain inalienable rights that are vested in us as individuals that you, the government, cannot infringe upon. What does this amendment do? This amendment says, excuse me, who we are as a person, who is a person, and the right to life being paramount will be implemented by the legislature. It gives me pause, and it makes me think there are some really serious separation of powers issues there. Okay, that's just the first handful, just little handful of things that are wrong with this amendment. And that's still under the rubric of it's just too broad. Now, the second main thing is that this proposed amendment to our Constitution amends more than one section. Now, why is that important? Well, when we adopted the 1972 Constitution, the framers said there are going to be specific ways in which we can, in the future, amend our Constitution. And they actually set parameters on how the Constitution can be amended. And one of those parameters is in Article 14, Section 11. And I have my little Constitution. And Article 14, Section 11 says, when you're amending the Constitution, if more than one amendment is submitted at the same election, each shall be so prepared and distinguished that it can be voted on separately. It's called the separate vote requirement. Each amendment to the Constitution must be voted on separately. Why? You don't want a wholesale amendment to the Constitution. You can't log roll one amendment into another. In order to have an informed electorate and an informed amendment and to actually accomplish what you want to do through the vote, people have to know what they're voting on, right? you have to have an ability to know what you're voting on, what is the full impact of what you're voting on. That doesn't happen when more than one amendment is submitted at the time. You're obviously, okay, I'm going to vote that the right to life is paramount, but gosh, I'm at the same time maybe affecting every woman's right of privacy in the state. That starts looking like more than one amendment, right? It starts looking like more than one amendment. When you say, I'm going to redefine person for all purposes under Article 2, you have to look at each section, each of the 34 sections, look at the use of the word person, look at the right in which a person is vested under Article 2, and then say, well, gosh, do I want to amend the way in which person is considered under Article 2? And so that is why we have a separate vote requirement. And the last part is, oh my goodness, do I want the legislature to implement this anyway? So it basically amends more than one section. And I think we have a very strong argument here. And I'm going to embarrass this person by doing this. But I want to introduce Jim Reynolds, who is going to be, can you just stand up for us, Jim, please? He is a brilliant lawyer, and I used to work with Jim. And he will be our lead attorney in the constitutional challenges to CI 100. And I'm just really proud and happy that he's on board with that. Yeah, Sydney.
Can I ask a question? If there are these problems to it before we even get any further, how did it become, how did Mike McGrath say it was okay to be?
Oh my goodness, let me re-say that so everyone can hear it. Sydney Tabor, who works with the ACLU in Helena part-time and is very helpful to us, she asks, how could it have gotten this far? If there are so many significant problems with this amendment, aren't there some kind of checks and balances that we have initially in place before it even goes to the voters or to the electorate for signatures? Yes, there is. And one of those balances that we have is that it goes, and this is statutory, it's not in the Constitution, it goes to the Montana Attorney General, one of the processes in making in an initiative being able to be placed on the ballot. It goes to the Attorney General for a determination of the ballot language that you saw. It's at the Attorney General's office that they come up with the ballot language, the for and against language, and also the summary that Kathy put up. So we need that developed, right? We can't, we have asked that we have those summaries, and that makes sense. Often there are lawsuits based over how the Attorney General phrases the ballot language and the for and against, the voting language. Excuse me. But at this point, we don't know whether or not there will be challenges with respect to the ballot language. At this point, I can't say. But the second thing the Attorney General does is determine what's under the statute called the legal sufficiency. The legal sufficiency of the amendment. Now, what's really interesting is that none of us knows what legal sufficiency really means. I have argued for years with the Attorney General, as have others here, that means that if you have a clearly unconstitutional amendment proposed to you, Attorney General, you must find it legally insufficient. It makes sense to me. We did this in the stop overspending cases. We've done it in other cases. The Attorney General, however, has interpreted this provision to mean basically, if it's in the right format, we will let it go out for signature gathering. And on that, to his credit, And then the ACLU is involved in this side of the argument a lot. To his credit, you do want the presumption to be towards signature gathering and the ability to put things on the ballot and the ability to, get things in front of the people, and you want to advocate for the people's right to vote. So there is that huge part, I think, that the Attorney General is looking at. So he basically just says, I'm going to look and see if it's in the right format. Well, even our argument was, wait, it's not even in the right format. Why? Because the Constitution itself prohibits more than one amendment to be on the ballot unless it's separately stated and separately voted upon, right? So anyway, the Attorney General here decided that this ballot language was legally sufficient. We thought we had NARAL, Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, each submitted really extensive legal memos to the Attorney General to say that we thought this ballot was legally, this proposed amendment violated the separate, and it was the separate vote requirement more. There's also a single subject requirement that's kind of confusing, and I can go into that in greater detail. But the Attorney General said, no, I'm going to send it out for signatures, and I'm going to send it out for a possible vote. Now, under the statute, the only time we can challenge, or at least not the only time, but the statute provides that the time we can challenge the legal sufficiency determination by the Attorney General is if it qualifies for the ballot. So we're now going to wait. We're going to go through all this signature gathering process, a lot of time and expense on something that we certainly think is clearly unconstitutional, and see if it gets on the ballot. If it gets on the ballot, then it goes to the Secretary of State, and then the Secretary of State certifies it to the governor, and then within 10 days of certifying it to the governor, we will have the opportunity to, at that time, challenge the legal sufficiency determination by the Attorney General. So maybe that's in too great a detail for what people want to know. But at this point, we still see that our legal challenges are significant. And okay, so the First Amendment is, it redefines person clearly for all the other provisions in Article 2. That to me is just such a no-brainer. Clearly, that's more than one amendment right there. It effectively amends a woman's right of privacy. To me, that's another no-brainer. Once you start saying the right to life is paramount and define the right to life as a fertilized egg, you are getting and thoroughly affecting a woman's right of privacy. Now, there's a little bit of a legal tweak here because sometimes implied amendments aren't seen as another amendment to the Constitution. So just because it doesn't go into Article 2, Section 10 and say, Article 2, Section 10, the right of privacy is amended, it may not be considered a separate amendment. We're going to be arguing it effectively amends the right of privacy and therefore it constitutes more than one amendment. The proposed amendment in itself contains 3 separate amendments. I firmly believe this. The first one is the right to life, the second one is redefining personhood, and the third one is that, to me, a problematic provision on legislative implementation of our basic rights under the Montana Constitution. And of course, then the last problem with it is that it's preempted by the federal Constitution. Now, I agree that the Montana Attorney General could not use that grounds probably to rule upon. He will be in the position, if it passes, to be defending the constitutional provision. So his legal sufficiency determination probably does not go to whether or not it's preempted by the U.S. Constitution. But certainly that will be one of our grounds when we come up in June. I think you can just go ahead and, pop all those up. What you have involved in a woman's right of privacy, you say, a woman's right of privacy, wow, well, gosh, everybody has to give up a little privacy now and then, in order to kind of, belong in society. Women are going to be out there just saying they want to have a lifestyle change. They're just determining their own lifestyle. What does the right of privacy mean? What does it entail? Well, foremost, what the right of privacy entails is the right to personal autonomy, the right to self-determination. And the Montana Supreme Court has said that in the Armstrong case. And we have a fundamental right in Montana to make medical decisions and choose our own health care providers. We have a fundamental right in Montana to engage in work. And when I say we, I mean we. You know, it's not just part of us. And sporting activities, we have a right to engage in certain sporting activities in Montana. Certainly in the high school level, we've determined that. And we have, this is an ever-evolving part of the Montana Constitution, and we're actually involved in litigation on this right now, is a constitutional right to parenting and the constitutional right to family and maintain your own relationships. This is the core. This is why in the film that you saw, I really actually thought it was so good. This is why they say that Roe versus Wade affects every aspect of our lives, because it affects each one of those things. Who you are, your right to work, the opportunity that you have, the right to family, the right to parenting, the right to relationships. I'll quit lecturing and open up to questions. But I think that's basically what I was going to say then, wasn't it, Kathy?
Do you want to just go through this, or I can, let's see, the practical list.
The potential effects are equally as broad, obviously, because of the breadth, the potential breadth of the effect of the Constitution. These are just examples of why we don't even know how broad it is, and so here are the potential practical effects. Clearly, government intrusion into confidential medical decisions. If a woman does miscarry, we're not even, if a woman, is every miscarriage going to be looked at as an abortion? Are we going to have to start changing women's lifestyles so that they might, if you have a high-risk pregnancy, do you have to start engaging in certain activity? Are you required to do bed rest? And if you don't, can the government investigate that?
I'm going to go back to that implementation language. And I don't remember clearly what the test is, but you started to say at one point self-executing.
Oh, right.
There is a test that the Montana Supreme Court uses to determine whether there's a private right of action under some of these
That's correct.
constitutional principles. And my memory is that if the implementation of that right of action is left to the government, that's a major factor in determining whether there's a private right of action. And I guess the question I'm getting at is, when you say government intrusion, I'm wondering if that implementation language lets me intrude. If I don't like what you're doing and you're pregnant, can I bring an action against you to enforce the right of your unborn child?
Oh, wow. I need to rephrase that. That's a really excellent question. So it starts with the idea that the legislature can implement this, and that means it's a non-self-executing constitutional provision, probably, or might be. Or if it's a self-executing constitutional provision, it means you may have a private party can sue another private party for infringement of constitutional right, okay? Like someone would come in and sue on behalf. They would designate themselves, maybe this is what you're getting at, designate themselves, or the government could designate someone as a guardian of the unborn fetus. So that then a fertilized egg would actually have standing to sue someone else. Or is that the kind of thing you're thinking about? Or a person?
A person could come in and get
as a guardian?
Appointed a guardian and sue to stop what you're doing on behalf of your unborn fetus.
Exactly. I see very much potential for that. Yeah.
Trigger the 19th Amendment.
The 19th Amendment with respect to
Slavery, involuntary servitude. As soon as
you bring up the Handmaid's Tale. Well,
it is effectively involuntary servitude to bear that child. which is unconstitutional.
You know, you certainly, you know, you certainly could. I think what you bring up, though, is really the concept that at a certain point, when you deprive a segment of our society of so many constitutional rights, that it actually constitutes slavery. And that's really what we're getting at, is we're making a second-class citizen of pregnant women, clearly. Yeah, Margie. I'm sorry.
It's illegal.
Well, our Constitution is our organic document that defines who we are and what is legal and what's not legal. So when you start amending that, be very careful.
I'm talking about federal Constitution at this point.
Oh, yeah. Well, how secure is Roe versus Wade? I mean, seriously, how secure is Roe versus Wade? Yeah, I mean, we have to think about that. Okay.
The weird thing about this is it says from the moment of conception. Well, then you've got, on a practical level, I'm no lawyer, so I don't feel legal, that am I pregnant, am I not? It means that from the moment of having sex, the woman is chained to the possibility that she's pregnant, does it not? Is there any kind of a legal challenge there? Like,
oh, absolutely. Again, that's the question is, are you chained? Are you this de facto slave from the moment of conception? And does that then bring all fertile women within the purview of this constitutional amendment? I think these are brilliant points, because what they highlight is how broad it is. We don't know its full impact. There was another question. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Same.
Yeah, so my question has to do with like Plan B contraceptive. Then, if it's at the point of conception, that would make it completely illegal, wouldn't it, to use Plan B?
There you go. Now, could you say your question just a little bit louder? Because I actually didn't. I heard the context.
Well, I have a couple questions, but the first one was just that, I mean, unequivocally, then Plan B would be illegal. Plan B contraceptive would be illegal if it's at the point of conception. So that would immediately limit choices that a woman has.
Absolutely, it absolutely would ban, or potentially, and not only then are you subject to a constitutional infringement at that point, you're subject to whatever penalties are imposed upon you by the legislature. It could become a crime. You could be imprisoned. I mean, potentially. I mean, I don't want to be alarmistic, but it could be a crime. You know, it's not just that you are enslaved if you do something in violation of it. I like this slavery idea. But you're not just enslaved, but if you do something in violation, then you become a criminal.
And my next question had to do with like complications with pregnancy then.
Right.
Would the hospital not be allowed then to intervene to save the mother's life? Or like whose life would take precedent in that type of situation? Exactly,
and I think we have that under our potential effects, is what effect does it have upon our healthcare providers? What liability and risk does it give to healthcare providers? Are they going to be subject to the same penalties as the fertile woman or childbearing age woman? You mean, yeah.
Yeah, would the woman have to get government permission to do a pregnancy test?
Well, maybe what we'd do is we'd all have to go in and pee in a cup every other day. I don't know. But, but seriously, it's not just get permission, or would it mandate pregnancy tests? That's the question. Would pregnancy tests be mandated? Because then that would be the way we could target the people whose lifestyle must be limited in order to protect this paramount right to life. I mean, it's seriously, if you have read Handmaid's Tale, it starts looking like that. Yeah.
Given that there's, I guess, 5 or 6 different states that are going through this process right now with the defining personhood, what would be the potential implications on the federal level if, say, some of those states or all of them had these kinds of initiatives passed?
Well, the question was, what would be the impact on a federal level if several of these states passed these kinds of initiatives? And that's a very good question, because What happens when the U.S. Supreme Court starts deciding whether or not you have a right of first of all, the right of privacy under the federal Constitution is a very tenuous thing. It's what we call a penumbral right. It's attached to our substantive due process rights. So it's not express like it is in the Montana Constitution. It's a value-based determination by the judge. I hate to say that, but I think that's really what the right of privacy is on a federal level. How does the U.S. Supreme Court decide whether on these penumbral rights, these shadowy rights that are implied into our U.S. Constitution, whether or not they're still in effect? Well, guess what? They look at what they call the melting pot of what's happening in the states. And they look, and in fact, you'll see that language in U.S. Supreme Court precedent all the time. They'll say, oh, we're going to let the states decide on this issue first before we decide whether or not something's constitutional. And if you have passage of amendments and legislation like this on many local levels, you'll see a U.S. Supreme Court using that as justification to amend the federal right of privacy, or at least to change its to change its interpretation of what it believes the right of privacy is under the U.S. Constitution. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, so Betsy, that leads to the next question, which is, what's the impetus behind this? Is this a particularly homegrown crusade, or is this something that is being sponsored on a nationwide, state-by-state level?
Great question, but our public policy person, our program development, Kathy has been integral in the organizational effort and is incredibly familiar with how this is working on a national level.
Okay, and that just segues into what can we do? I think you get.
Am I done? Good.
Oh, you're not. You're never done. You might any time, but I can't answer the question.
Okay, thank you.
This is part of a national movement. There are 5 states right now which are facing this. Colorado is one of them. Georgia, just if you were familiar with what was happening last legislative session, Representative Jor introduced this in the House. This made it exactly almost word for word. There's a few tweaks. It made it out of the House with a very interesting amendment, except in cases of the death penalty, which was very interesting. So already it was, it would have probably never met any muster anywhere, but it did make it out of the House. It got onto the House floor and was defeated there. And I see 2 of our wonderful folks who led the charge sitting right over here, Representative Sands and Willer, because we had to fight it on the House floor. And I will tell you that Representative Jor, when asked the question about does that mean that women who miscarry might be investigated, he said possibly. Yes, it could. In fact, and there was another bill in the legislature last session that wanted to involuntarily commit pregnant women for the duration of their pregnancy so that the fetus would be protected and then the fetus would be retained or kept in custody, and the woman, we don't know what would have happened to the woman. That was one of the questions. So it looks like this is just homegrown, and I'm going to talk to you now about what's happening, what the coalition is, and what the organizational efforts are. It looks like it's homegrown, and I think, but we don't want to be fooled by that. Come on, baby. It's not, well, I can do it more than one way to skin a cat. We don't want to be fooled by that. But the Thomas More Center is one of the folks who are behind this. And they have actually, Representative Jor has been quoted as saying that they will help at an organizational meeting where they were gathering signatures up in the Flathead, saying that they would actually help. Thank you, Jen, if you wouldn't mind. They would actually help with the legal challenges all the way. He'll take it to the Supremes, is what I heard was quoted. So there is it looks like it's kind of homegrown, and it looks right now pretty amateurish, but we're not taking that for granted. And so one of the wonderful things, I want to tell you about what's happened and encourage you, if you are so inclined, to please help us, because even if we defeat this now, even if this is homegrown now, even if it doesn't get anywhere because of poor organizational strategy on the proponent's part, it will come back. And there already is another constitutional amendment proposed for a parental notification bill. And it is sitting right now in with the sponsors of that, because the language was so broad, but that will be harder to defeat. So let me tell you some of the things that are happening. And please, The petition is being passed around. If you want to be involved in that at all, please let us know, because we will get you there. There has been for several years a Montana Reproductive Rights Coalition, which predominantly has been led by Planned Parenthood, NARAL Montana Pro-Choice, the Human Rights Network, and ACLU. When this first came on, I remember I was actually at a death penalty retreat. When it was interesting, I got on my BlackBerry that this had been proposed and submitted to the Secretary of State. The coalition joined together very, very quickly to launch an all-out effort with our national organizations as well to do what we could to fight this. We actually got in touch. We are working with, I'm on a listserv with my counterparts in the other states where this is already happening. There's a constitutional initiative in California, there's Georgia, I think Michigan, Colorado, I'm trying to think, Oregon has had one, and South Dakota had an abortion ban, which they're coming back with this year. So it is very much part of a national movement. But what we have done is already come together to form a broad-based coalition to oppose CI 100, and we have our members include Montanans who are not only pro-choice and reproductive rights advocates, but a lot of healthcare providers as well. If you want to switch to the next slide, Jen. This is the listing as of the day before yesterday of all the folks. There are people in this room who are representing organizations. Anita's if I can point out a few people, Blue Mountain Clinic here in Missoula. Margie is with Montana Women For. But you can see there's a lot of the folks, the usual suspects, but we've also got some interesting one, the Montana section of the College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. We just got National Family Planning and Reproductive Health. The pediatricians as an organization will not come on because they cannot agree in their ranks, but individuals are signing on as we speak. They're signing on. Someone who didn't sign on, but a piece of really good news that happened yesterday we knew this was going to happen, but it was official, is the 2 Catholic bishops in the state of Montana came out disavowing the amendment, saying they are not supporting it, that this is not the right way to achieve their pro-life agenda. So they definitely will not abandon their pro-life agenda. This is also what happened in Georgia. I also happened to see the testimony on that. So that is very, very helpful to us, because if you go back and look at some of the PR that's been done, and I've read the minutes of the Constitution Party's annual meeting, which I never thought I would do, but I did. They assumed that the Catholic churches would be very much instrumental in working with them. However, I don't want to assume that that's going to mean that that they aren't going to forge an all-out attack. We have a ballot steering committee who basically does the day-to-day work. We have received, and this is who makes it up, and I wanted you to see the folks on it because some of you know them and you see who's working on this. But we meet weekly. We have actually received some significant funding from an anonymous donor to do an all-out voter education piece and a decline to sign campaign. And so we have done polling already, initial polling, and what we've been told is if you're just asking about an all-out abortion ban, it's a really tough fight. Montana's divided 50-50. When you start to educate people and tell them exactly, if we could take Betsy around and put her on the road, and you start to tell them about the potential implications, people begin to swing our way. So, go ahead, Jen. I want to tell you what we're looking at time-wise and where we really need. We are looking for a campaign manager right now and are also hiring field staff. Hired our first field staff the other day. But to qualify for the ballot, this is what has to happen. It has to be approved by the Attorney General, which it happened. It was done December 20th, despite some very brilliant legal challenges. And then they have to gather a total of 44,615 signatures from 10% of the voters in 40% of the legislative districts. And the deadline for doing that is June 20th. The big push for doing this, and historically, if any of you were involved in the Tabor, the CI 97 fight, or watch what happened, will be primary day. The weather is starting to warm up. We're starting to see some activity happening. If you recall last time, that was very controversial. That was the tax cap and the spending cap. That was defeated actually through signature fraud gathering, and so the statute has been rewritten. But we put together a stellar legal team who already, Jim is leading up the team, and we have Betsy from ACLU, we have Pam Busey and from Planned Parenthood and Mike Malloy are all working on our team to look at strategies so that we are ready. And so, I mean, because if, say, Betsy told you about that window where if it gets on the ballot, you have like about a 10-day frame where you can challenge. If we want to do that, we have to begin to look at that now. But the deadline for gathering is June 20th, and then the signatures are certified by the Secretary of State. If our goal is to stop it there, is not to get beyond there. However, if they get the signatures, and the estimate is, because of the way it happens, they have to get about 63,000 signatures. Because in order to meet that 10% in 40 of the legislative districts, they have to get more, and then some will be thrown out. We're already engaging in looking at signatures, trying to detect fraud early on, training people how to do that. But if it qualifies, then all it needs is a majority vote in the general election November 4th. And if you just look at that and look at this presidential election, the amount of money and the amount of resources and time that the people who are working on this are spending is criminal, in my opinion, when we could be doing really, I could go on and on, good things for teaching people how to make good, healthy choices in their lives and lead full lives. So it's very frustrating. What can you do to be involved? One of the things we did is we are working on our legal challenges. We challenged out of the gate, and it didn't work. I am confident in our legal team, and we're continuing to do it. We are right now building our ground force. We're working with the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center out of Washington, D.C. They are working with us on training a field team so that as they start collecting signatures, we can begin to identify if there's fraud. This is where we really, if any of you want a part-time job for a few months, I can tell you where to apply. But if not, if you'd like to, say on a Saturday, I'd be happy to be involved, or come to a little training event about what to look for in your community. Those are the kinds of things we'll invite you to become involved in. Right now, what we're asking people is, because you aren't trained, and the statute also, those of us who might oppose this initiative don't want to get accused of harassment. So we're not asking you to go out and stop anybody who's gathering signatures, but you might engage them. They're supposed to show everybody the full text of the amendment, that language I showed you earlier. They have to show them there's 2 pages to this petition. They have to show them the constitutional language, and they have to show them the for and against, and they have to witness the signature. You might just go and engage someone in conversation and ask them, what are they doing, and tell me about this, and see if they're doing that right. Go ahead.
Are we supplying any literature that we could bombard people with that are anywhere near their collectors?
We're beginning that right now. They don't have.
I mean, some real. We can get real nasty on this literature, and we should. I mean, like it is unconstitutional. Like you're putting women in slavery. Things like that should be put out on the literature.
We're working with that right now. But you know what? None of us are media specialists. This is our first little flyer we did just to get going with here. But we're engaging. We work with national organizations who are very concerned about the messaging long term, and so we're working with national messengers, folks who deal with this all the time, message development, and then we are hiring a media firm to do that. You're absolutely right, though. We intend, but it takes a lot of people. We know we don't have to win every county. We know we don't have to win everywhere in Montana, so we're really strategically looking at voter files and looking at IDs to see where do we have to keep it from qualifying. And that's where we're really going to focus. We think that if we can win Missoula, if we can win this area, perhaps if we can win Billings, and that's where you're right, we will have very good, but part of it takes money, and we just got the money. the first onslaught of money. We hope there's more. So we're doing a signature gathering, but if you see anybody's signature gathering, there is a website there. If you wanted to just shoot, you can actually go into the website and just send an email or even contact one of us. There is a phone number there, and just say, hey, Kathy, or send an email and say they're gathering signatures. We're just trying to see where they're active right now. Go ahead.
Is it okay for us to hand out flyers and stuff like that where they're doing the signature gathering at? Is that still, or is that considered harassment?
No, you can do it. it's free speech, but you can't, we're really asking people not to get too organized on that till we get out and train, because we want to be sure that we're doing it. But that's one of the things. And if you knew anything that, you have to understand like how far you're supposed to be from the polls. And we're working with local county election officials to make sure we're doing it right and not getting, we're working with the people who learned a heck of a lot. And Jim and Betsy can tell you more, but the Tabor fight on the CI-97, they've really been helpful. We're trying not in any way we're trying to stay clean. So, but they handed out literature and they wore signs, that said, think before you ink, those kind of things.
Approach with some kind of mailing every conservative church, the priest, the reverend, the leaders of the church and the churches, and ask them for some kind of response so you know which ones you have to target later. Because basically, if I was them, I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't go out on the street to get these signatures. Mm-hmm. I would go to the various right-wing churches there are around, there are enough of them. But if you can convince the people this is going to backfire, number one, the literature going to them is going to say, if that child becomes a human being, then the 19th Amendment of the Constitution falls in, and the woman's right to abortion is absolute.
Mm-hmm. And churches are part of our strategy. You're absolutely right.
But you have to do some fear mongering on the second set, because you don't know if the court will do it, allow that, but Roe versus Wade should have been on the 19th Amendment, not on what they used in the first place.
Anita?
Just a comment, as the clinic's been receiving some letters from citizens of concern, and it seems like it's stemming a lot from the church groups. And what it also indicates from some of the content of the letters is that they're showing movies like The Silent Scream, which is real propaganda, anti-abortion type of film to get people invested in the idea of CI-100. So they're doing some pretty effective tactics. That's where we think they're going to be doing most of their organizing is in churches. And so we've already been in some of them, but we don't have we need a ground force. And that's private property. We need to be able to go to those churches appropriately. So, I agree with you, we need to look at that, but we have to do it right. We have to be very careful about how we do that. So that's very much on our agenda.
You sent letters to the preachers explaining the dangers of this thing to them. It's going to backfire in their face.
I'd like to think they'd believe that. To me, it makes perfect sense. I can't sign the letter. If it comes from ACLU, I don't know. They'll say, oh, those guys. The other thing we're doing is exactly what you're talking about, is we're starting a broad-based voter education to prevent. We're trying to get people not to sign. We're also trying to identify people. There actually is a process, if you signed it and didn't mean to, you can withdraw your signature, so we're training people how to do that. We're doing grassroots canvassing. We're going door to door, is what we plan to do in our targeted areas. And we are going to get earned and paid media. And many of you can help with that. And let me tell you how that happens. First of all, don't sign the petition, please, if you see it. Please. I hate to admit this. I feel like I'm going to confession, but I used to work for the Catholic Church, so I can say this. I'm used to it. I used to say, I believe in the ballot procedure. I believe in the ballot process, and I do, and we support that. But to put your name on it may potentially be a vote for it and get it to qualify. So this is so critical. We're really encouraging people not to. Think about what you're signing. Spread the word. Word of mouth is really, really important. Your thoughts are great, but to get to every small church or to even identify the pastors and the mailing list is really hard in the state of Montana. So word of mouth is really, really important. We need people to write letters to the editor for local newspapers. And if you're willing to do that, if you've seen, we already have a campaign in some communities. If you're willing to do that, all you have to do is let us know, and our website is right on here. Or you can call the ACLU office, let us know, and we'll provide you with prototypes. We don't want you to all write the same letter, but we'll give you samples.
So on the initiative itself, there were two boxes that you can check. One that you're for it, and the second one is against it. Is there any way to change the wording of that second part to, I think the Constitution works just fine?
You know, that was one small victory we had. That wasn't that was not the wording that Representative Jor wanted, and that was the one small victory that we had in our legal challenges, was to get them to make the wording a little bit better and a little bit more honest. I wish it was. Go ahead, Jen. I don't know why that's just not. Oh, sign up, which you're doing today. There's another page. Alert us, volunteer to assist your field team. If you're willing to help, and you know conservative pastors in your area and would like to go talk to them, please let us know that. If you know someone who's mistakenly signed, we will get out there and withdraw, get their names removed. If you want to make a contribution or join the coalition, if you would like your name on there, there is on the website, there is a place where you can actually sign up to be a coalition partner. The more names we get on there, the more credible we become. We are actually talking to a lot of medical folks as well as insurance companies, trying to see if we can get some of the, what we call the unusual suspects, to be part of our coalition. Oh, and I want to say, or join the coalition. The broad coalition meets once a month right now. That big group, they're all invited to a monthly meeting and a monthly update. And if you do join that, you can join us, and we do that over the phone. We do, if you can't be there in person. And there's an endorsement form on the webpage to join the coalition. And then finally, this is a work in progress. We've just got it up. We've got a website. But please go to it, take a look at it. There are some frequently asked questions. And the messaging you asked about too, we're trying to get more and more of that on there to give people the tools that they need. So with that, yeah, open it up, Diane.
Can I just say, as most of you probably don't know, but I actually ran a campaign in '94 in Idaho that kept an anti-gay ballot measure off the ballot with a decline to sign campaign. This can be done, but they are in touch with all the right people and working with BISC and all to do this. But it may be things that you're not all wildly comfortable about. The messages that work for those of us who are totally committed to these issues are not necessarily the language or the way to approach it for the people we need to convince who are more undecided, in the middle. And those are the people we have to reach with these campaigns. So those issues of messaging and how you talk to them. I mean, I had to keep people from going out and hammering on the Mormon community. And we won the majority of the Mormon votes on an anti-gay ballot measure. But you have to be very strategic and careful in how you do these, and particularly coalitions of the faith-based organizations talking to themselves, not you as an outsider yelling at people about this, no matter what. So I think the leadership on this is doing an excellent job. They're working with all the right national and in-state people who've done many of these campaigns across the country. It requires a lot of sophisticated work and a lot of money, and happily we have those partners to do it. But everybody has a place and something to do in this campaign, so thanks for all the work you're doing.
Well, thank you, Diane. Well, that's, real quickly, I wanted to say that is, I don't need to convince all you in this room probably this is wrong. I mean, we could go on and on. A lot of people don't understand that's one of been the very uncomfortable things for the coalition, because we've got folks who are saying, I'm tired of apologizing for saying that abortion should be a right. But that's not if we want to win this, we have to be strategic. We have to understand people. Jess.
Thank you for putting families up there with a man. It isn't just women.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what a lot of our messaging is it needs to be families. We do have the Progressive Clergy Alliance. I'm getting old, I can't read how small that is, but we actually have one clergy group. We are not going to get the Catholic Diocese on here, but what they've done has been immensely wonderful for this effort.
For example, this really isn't about being pro-choice as much as it is raising questions about this being too extreme and too overreaching. In Idaho, we want to make all the good folks want to say it's all about discrimination. In the end, the message that worked, and we didn't like it, was it's too much government and not enough Idaho.
Yeah.
So it's raising those questions that this is just too extreme and too far-reaching.
Yeah, in fact, what polls really good right now is government intrusion and don't mess with our Constitution. Here and then here. Kim? Yeah.
I think that's all fine. I think we need to make sure with our messages that we're not marginalizing our friends.
Exactly.
As we're going forward with this, I think we have to be really careful.
Did you guys all hear that? She said, it is a balancing act. We can't marginalize our friends. Tara, over here, and then I'll grab you. Go ahead. Yeah.
This is the ultimate unfunded mandate.
Yes.
not only for the working family, but the unwanted child is a disproportionate part of the prison population. So we have perpetual college tuition for society for the rest of this kid's life.
Yeah.
And it's very expensive keeping people in jail, particularly when they become embittered and require higher security. It starts running up about the same cost as an Ivy League education on an annual basis.
A very practical example of how broad, we don't even know what something like this would do. Tara?
Well, I just wanted to expand on Kim's point a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone would disagree about the importance of nuanced messaging and certainly highlighting how broad and expansive the potential implications of this initiative are. But I do think that we all have to be fairly careful about how we phrase that. Like, this isn't just an abortion initiative. This isn't just as if it simply were a ban on abortion, it would be okay. So I just think we have to be really, really careful as we do that nuanced messaging, not to marginalize the importance of choice in and of itself.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, because the battle's not over. That's what we've discovered is, I'm really hoping we're going to win this, but it'll be back again. And the same awful things that were in the legislature last time will be back again. And so we have, I mean, it's very tough.
I should ask this when Kathy was up there, but maybe I didn't.
That's okay.
When you had up there at the beginning about, talking about the safety, so the thought came to me, does it not, you're saying all through life, well, does that not effectively come to the elderly? And we're talking about even hospice, or if you want to stop medication,
good point.
Or you want to stop being fed, wouldn't that also be involved as a broad thing?
I hope everybody heard that comment because it's a really great one. Would, in fact, the broad nature of this amendment affect compassionate choices at the end of life? Absolutely. I mean, I don't see how it couldn't. A right to life is paramount. And so when you start talking about medical decisions at the end of life, I think, there's another, thank you very much for mentioning that. Yeah.
And also, I just happen to work in medical records, that immediately after the Shivo case, just how effective this talking point could be. I mean, people who came in to fill out their living wills it was just a flood.
There was a flood of living wills.
To make sure I get one written down. So I mean, it's an extremely.
It goes along with that idea of you're amending the Constitution. It's such a huge effect. Diane brought up that really good point that it's a government intrusion and it's too broad. And I guess that was one of the points of what I was saying just initially. We don't know. You're amending our organic document in an extremely broad fashion, and we don't know the full ramifications. So it is more than an abortion issue. I don't know if that helped.
But, and I hate to do this, but I am getting the high sign. So if all of you agree to run out, there's another workshop here in here in about 12 minutes. So if you all agree to stay here and watch that or run out real quick, I'll let you keep on going. Brent?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, as far as the decline sign petition campaign, it's really important that people actually know about what the actual effect is, because when you read the wording initially, it's ostensibly extending rights. And part of the problem with this campaign is that people in Montana are very protective of our rights. When they see something that ostensibly protects rights, they're going to sign it. So the most important thing, at least in my mind, is just getting the word out there, and at a minimum, getting people to think about what this actually does. Letters to the editor, we've done a couple, and our circle of friends have been outstandingly received and very negatively received on both sides. But at least they're getting people to think about the issues. So the worst thing that could happen is if people see this on their door for the first time when the petitioner stands there. We need to get the message out beforehand so they know what they're signing or not signing.
And we're going to be we're canvassing and going door to door. As soon as we get the team mobilized, we're doing billboards. I mean, it's going to be an all-out effort. But go ahead. Yeah.
I'm a former newspaper editor, excuse me, and I recommend extreme care in proposing language for letters to the editor. I did not like ever to receive boilerplate letters. We would not run them. So proposing talking points or writing points is fine, but watch out for proposing letters that a lot of people send the same ones.
Absolutely. Did you hear that? We don't want, I mean, we'll give you talking points, but if everybody sends the same letters, they're not going to get published. An excellent point. Over here, did you have something? Okay. If you want to continue the conversation, those of us who are working on this are available. I want to thank you all so much. We'll break for about 10 minutes, and then death penalty and lethal injection are in here, and in the other room is drug law reform. You guys have been wonderful. Thank you.